Hey there, folks. Before we begin, I would really appreciate it if you'd be willing to go search up the BIPOC Streamer Awards and cast your vote for the Chatterbox Award for the Winging It podcast, because we're up for it for this year, and we'd really like to potentially win that. So if you could do us a favor, head over there and make that vote for us, that would be highly appreciated. On with the discussion. Hey there, folks. This is Andre the Game Idea Guy. So I've been back and forth on this whole Assassin's Creed Shadows thing. And yes, I know my individual discussion about it is rather late. Obviously, I have gone over this several times. I've recorded and re-recorded, and nothing felt completely right to me to post. Hopefully I'll post this one. But I've gone back and forth on this so many times because I try to see the point of both sides of an argument. Even if I disagree with the stance, I try to at least understand why the stance is what it is. Now, I'm not going to try to disregard people. I'm not going to try to disregard people's individual thoughts or anything like that, because that's not intended for this discussion. But if there are people who think that there aren't any people who exist that wouldn't buy Assassin's Creed Shadows simply because Yasuke is an African male, you're incorrect. And for those who think that there won't be anybody who purchases the game simply because he is an African male, you are also incorrect. Though the numbers of those people, and relative to the larger portion of people who would potentially buy this game, are small, they do exist. And there are people who will specifically and only purchase the game for racial representation, or won't purchase it for racial representation. Let's not pretend that's not a thing. Let's also not pretend that the majority of people who are perpetually online, or meaning they spend all of their time online and they never detox from it, they don't see things in the way that you would normally rationally see things. And that's on both sides of the argument. The ones for the game and the ones against. What's wild to me is how this became a practice in trying to discredit the existence of the actual person, or discredit how he existed. For years, we've had representation of Yasuke as a samurai, be it in books, movies, video games, all of these things coming from Japan. Sorry, had a little bit of air stuck in my throat. Japan. All of these things came from Japan. So if Japan is representing Yasuke as a samurai, I don't see a problem with Ubisoft doing it. Ubisoft, I say it both ways. I don't see a problem with them doing it. Especially when two of their Japanese studios, Ubisoft Osaka and Ubisoft, I want to say Tokyo, are working on this. Again, if Japanese representation from games has represented him as a samurai, I don't see a problem with him being represented as a samurai in the game. That should have never been a point of contention. That was one of the more frivolous arguments that came out of this. Because now everyone's suddenly an overnight historian, when even Japanese historians point to Yasuke as being the first and potentially most famous foreign samurai. So and this has been going on for years. This is not new. So I don't see why people are worried about trying to discredit the actual person at this point. Yeah, we don't have a whole lot of information on what happened to him after Nobunaga and his son were killed. But you know why we don't? I mean, it couldn't have been that the people that took him out wouldn't have wanted there to be a whole lot of information on Yasuke after that point. Any potential documents that may have had his name or anything that referenced him could have been destroyed. It's not a new thing for humans to destroy the written history of someone from a different culture, or even within the same culture that they had a disagreement with. Mitsuhide could have easily taken the time to make sure anything talking about Yasuke and what potentially was lying in front of him, should Nobunaga's campaign have been completely successful. So, and you gotta think about it this way, that Mitsuhide was more than likely a nationalist, and he didn't like the idea of someone foreign having that much power in Japan. That during that time period back then, you would have probably found a lot of that, especially since there weren't as many foreigners in Japan during that time period. But what a lot of people don't know, there were actually several villages in Japan of darker skinned people. I'm not going to necessarily say that they were all African, but there were definitely villages during that time period, maybe not a lot of them, but some small villages back then that had darker skinned people in Japan. And with us not knowing where Yasuke went after everyone was defeated and he was the last one left, because there are too many different things that say he went back to Africa and or he stayed in Japan secretly, and people wonder, like, well, how would he have stayed in Japan? He sticks out like a sore thumb. He wasn't the only dark-skinned person in Japan at the time. He may have been one of the more notable ones, but he wasn't the only one. So again, all of this going about, well, he was this, he wasn't this, we don't fully know. We know he started out as a slave, but he was also decently known for his ability to fight. So let's not focus on those details, especially when there's other media that shows him in the same light. Maybe he wasn't a general, but he was also by Nobunaga's side all the time. So is it really that big of a stretch to say, okay, we can make him a general for a historically inaccurate game? Like, why is this the biggest point of contention? Why is this the thing we're worried about? That should have never been the thing to worry about. Because everybody say, oh, well, don't you miss when Assassin's Creed was historically accurate? It was never historically accurate. It's always been alternative historical fiction. That's what it's always been. Unless we're going to say now that Leonardo da Vinci was working with assassins and that he created a machine that allowed people to glide, basically flying. And on top of that, he pretty much built a tank. Or are we going to say all of those things happened and pretend that they actually did? Even if he may have had ideas or blueprints for something, that doesn't necessarily mean that those things actually came into fruition. It just means he had thoughts about them. So, saying Assassin's Creed is historically accurate, especially when you got Valhalla, bro, y'all on something. You're on something. And it's never, again, I don't worry about it being historically accurate. I worry about it being actually good or interesting to me. Now, do I think that using Yasuke in the first game in Assassin's Creed in Japan as one of the two main characters was the right move? Personally, no. Because I would have seen that and looked at the way things are going currently and be like, no, this is... Even 5 years ago, I could have told you that this would not end well. To put him as one of the faces of the game. And everyone ignores the Japanese Kunoichi Naoe. Like, she's in front of him. She's the first playable character that you see in that cutscene that they decided to show everyone. You don't see him at least until a full minute into that video. But you see her almost immediately. And everyone ignores her existence. She is the Japanese representation for players. Now, should she be the only one? No. Again, from my position, I don't think that's how it should have been done. Personally. I think it would have been better to use someone who was underneath Mitsuhide, because I didn't even think about it, because I was going to say Mitsuhide himself, but then Jay pointed out he's been used a lot as is. So they could have come up with a fictional character or even a real person that worked beneath Mitsuhide to be the main lead for the first half of the story. And they could have broke this story down into 2 games. And then after you have a battle with Yasuke at the end, making him pretty much the final boss, a new game comes out and you're playing from his perspective to get revenge on Mitsuhide, because he didn't last long after Nobunaga's death anyway. So you could use that wide open space where no one knows anything to create a story. I think that would have worked out better. There would have been less backlash from the Western side of things, because going through all the stuff I've seen from Japanese people, and I'm going to clue people in on something. When you translate what an actual Japanese person says into English, there are going to be breaks in how the language works, because they both work in reverse of each other. Yeah, there are going to be some sentences that fit straightforward, but the majority, things are going to be flipped around. It's going to look odd to you when you translate it. People that potentially are faking it, when you translate what they say, is going to just straight up make sense to you when you look at it. Just a little tip for people that might be confused. Because there are certain different words in Japanese. There are several words that can refer to the same thing, but each of those words has a different instance in which it is supposed to be used. So if it just translates completely perfectly in English, and you don't have to kind of, reconfigure the words in your brain to make sense, more than likely that person's faking it. They're using some sort of translator online to pretend that they are Japanese. And I'm going to say this now. People trying to use YouTube likes for the Japanese trailer for Assassin's Creed Shadows forget that we all know you can look at it just like we can. So if a bunch of people disliked it and they wanted to show that they disliked it, more than likely they went to each and every version of that video and gave it a dislike. That's not a hard concept to understand. It really isn't. And it shouldn't be. It's not like being online on YouTube, this allows you access to the Japanese version of the site, because it doesn't. The Japanese, the French, the German, you can go on to the different versions of YouTube and give videos likes or dislikes. And heck, you don't even have to change versions of YouTube. All you have to do is find the channels. So again, not a good argument to support yourself. Just like people using Wikipedia. Oh gosh, I hate when people use Wikipedia as the main source of their info. It's okay to use Wikipedia to get a cursory glance of information, because there are people who do dedicate a good amount of time to putting up accurate information. But if that information is not sourced, you cannot assume it is correct. You have to look into the sources. Actually, you should do that with any platform. Just like the Britannica thing that's been floating around. That doesn't have sources to it, so I'm not going to just run and say, oh yeah, you need to listen to them. Look for the sources of the information yourself if they don't have them. Now, for the people that are arguing that, yeah, it's fine to use Yasuke. Like, a lot of Japanese people, at least from what I see, don't mind that they're using Yasuke. Actually, they preferred that Yasuke be the one that they use if they use the foreigner. So, at least from what I could see. But this game does have the air of, well, we're doing this because we're like, you're in Japan, and when you hear you're doing a story based in Japan, and when you hear about the person who was working on the story say, we've had enough white male protagonists, that is a red flag there. That's a huge red flag. This one, you're in Japan. Who the fuck gives a damn about a white boy being in Japan? If we being honest, especially during that period of time. I mean, there are probably a few of them over there anyway, but we don't care. The majority of people aren't going to care. Like, I do understand the argument for people saying, yes, it's the first game based in Japan for Assassin's Creed, so the important or the characters that you played with should have been Japanese, both of them. I understand that argument. I have no issue with that particular argument. But when you have that come out, and then Ubisoft promoting that everybody's going to be LGBTQ and all that, now you have marked this game as a piece of pander media. You have marked this game as pandering media. You've turned this into a checkbox. That's going to put a lot of people off, because then it feels like you're not focusing on the things to make the game good. You're focusing on the things to make yourself feel good, and those shouldn't be the reasons that you make this. Like, I don't need a game to have a black character in it in order for me to find the game interesting or the story interesting. But I do like knowing that, hey, yeah, there are games with black characters out there that are doing awesome things. But the idea that the character is black is not the main focus. It's that, yo, hey, this is a really cool character, and he happens to share potentially some genealogy with you. Meaning, oh, cool, I can do stuff like this too, if it exists in our world at least. And I don't like that type of stuff, where it has to be determined that the race of the character is the important thing. But I will say, at least from what I've heard about the game, I do like the idea of doing a juxtaposition of what a foreign person would see in Japan during that time period versus what someone who is local to Japan sees. And from that perspective, I can understand, yes, using Yasuke as one of the main characters and then using Nawe as the other. I can get behind that concept. That doesn't bother me because that's actually an interesting perspective. But solely based on your race or who you like to sleep with or your sex, like that doesn't make me interested in the story. Those are details that fit into the story, but they generally shouldn't be considered prominent points unless, and I mean specifically unless, that is what the story is about. If you're going through any warring period in Japan, I doubt that sexual orientation matters much to anyone. I'm highly doubting that. I'm highly doubting that they're going to care much that, hey, there's that one foreign guy over there. They're at war. They're fighting. They're in a conflict. And the conflict was more so about who was right. About bringing together Japan as one unified nation. That's the more interesting thing. At least as far as I'm concerned. But for all of those who would have issue with me saying that, that's my personal opinion. Again, I try to understand both sides of an argument if I can. I'm not perfect. Nowhere near. But I at least try to get an understanding of what someone who opposes my thoughts might think. And before anyone thinks I have like some issue with people presenting sexuality in a game, I don't. Depends on how it's done. Like Capcom Resident Evil 6 saying that the guy that was partnered with Chris Redfield was gay, even though that had nothing to do with what was going on in the game. I had an issue with that. But take Steve from Mass Effect 3. We know he's gay. I don't have a problem with his character. You want to know why? Because we get to see into the character and the person. We get to see who the person is and see how his journey goes throughout Mass Effect 3. It's part of getting to know the character. It's not just a detail that's thrown out there and talked about for brownie points. And Steve is actually a really compelling character. But if you make a game and you put these things in it, I don't think you need to make those specific details front and center, especially if you're going to add in romance options to a game and allow the player to choose the romantic partners. If you're allowing the player to choose the romantic partners, then it's still a moot point at that point. It is a highly a moot point at that point, unless you are specifically looking at those characters. Then that doesn't need to be talked about again as a way to present the game. It just needs to be an intricate detail that makes the game more interesting. Something that you discover along the way, not something that you use as a billboard to say, hey, come and buy me. Because ultimately all the pandering is to make people make a purchase based off emotions. And those same emotions will make people not purchase a product because you're not being genuine with people about the product. Or at least it comes off that way. And that's why I understand when Sandstorm said all this other stuff coming out, he lost interest because it came down to feeling like, hey, we're checking off a box here, a box there, a box here. If you have to come up with a formula to make people interested in something, then the product itself will become derivative and everything will start to feel the same. Diversity doesn't mean we have to stick everybody in something. Diversity means that things can be different from each other. They don't have to be the same. If you're worried about diversity in video games, make something different. But if you're going to be saying, oh, well, we have this person here, we have that person there, we have this type of person here, you're losing the point. You're not seeing the forest for the trees. Everyone exists. All types of different people exist. No one's existence should be discredited. But we also shouldn't specifically hunt down something to throw into something that has nothing to do with the events of the story. Like, if it's not concretely a part of the events of the story or what takes place in the game, and it's something that's optional, it shouldn't be front and center. It really shouldn't be. Like, if someone was to make a game, and I think there actually is one coming out, but if someone was to make a game about someone who is wheelchair bound, and this person happens to be a gay black nerd who wears these thick bifocal glasses, then I'm not worried about how he somehow has a lesbian neighbor down the street that he could potentially have a romance option with. It doesn't make sense. And I'm not talking I meant that somebody's making a game about a character with bound to a wheelchair. I think someone is. I just don't remember the name of the game. I threw in several other details at random. But if that's what you're doing and you're focusing on the character and their particular story, then that's what the game should be about. The people that affect that particular character's life and what goes on in that character's life. Not, hey, he has a hot lesbian neighbor down the block and she's kind of interested in him and they potentially may cross those lines. Like, why? Why is that even a thing? Why is that the billboard you're putting up? Rather than, hey, this is a story about this character, this person, their struggle, their life, and how they overcome things. If that makes any sense to anybody. Hopefully it does. I think I did a horrible job describing that, but hopefully someone can actually see what I'm trying to say. Let's not make the unimportant details the important details, because they're unimportant for a reason. They're flavor. They're not the main course. Nobody walks around. Can't say nobody, but I doubt there's a lot of people that just walk around with seasoning in their pocket just to lick it every now and again. You kind of, you want the main course first, and then you sprinkle in the seasoning. You add it to it, but the seasoning isn't the focal point. The meal itself is. Yes, the seasoning can't enhance or make it worse if it's not properly done. But your focus isn't the seasoning. Well, you don't want a plate full of pepper. Again, I hope nobody does. But you want that steak. You want those potatoes. You want your veggies on the side. You want your glass of wine with it. You want the complete meal, not just a plate of seasoning. Hoping that analogy works. It's hard to talk about stuff like this because people's feelings are so sensitive to stuff like that. And you don't want to be insensitive. And I don't also want to go and rile up the crowd that's gung-ho against everything and have them, oh yeah, you see, he agrees with us. No, I don't. Because you're going overboard. I understand that there are some problems with people forcing representation in things, but at the same time, when you are overly negative against any sort of representation happening, especially when there's a game about an African man and it was made by a guy who was trying to honor his father, you've lost the plot for me. He was honoring his father and his heritage. So that shouldn't have even been an issue. I don't give a damn what Sweet Baby may have done because they were already paid. They don't get any residuals from whatever goes on with this game. And that guy shouldn't have had that happen to him. Or his team. So there has to be a balance. There's got to be a way to look at things and be like, hey, this may be just not for me. And move on without being disrespectful to a group of people that have literally nothing to do with you. But that's going to be an ongoing argument no matter what I say or think. Life sucks. But I think I'm going to end it here with my potentially horrible explanation with the seasoning and food. I still feel like that didn't quite clearly make everything make sense, but I tried. But if anybody has any thoughts or any opinions that they would like to add, please do. Again, always open to hearing them. Just try and make sense of all this crap. All right, everybody. Peace out. This is Andre, the Game Idea Guy, and I'd like to thank you once again for tuning in. If you would be interested in supporting my efforts in content creation, please head on over to Amazon and look up The Game Idea Guy Presents Gaming Word Search, and you will find both Volume 1 and Volume 2 up for sale. Thank you very much once again, and I hope to be able to create more content for you in the future. Peace out.